The first report came from a fishing boat. Nobody took it seriously. Not at first. Bass Strait was busy enough that unusual sightings happened all the time. Weather played tricks on people. Fog distorted distance. Low cloud hid details. Most strange reports had very ordinary explanations. This one should have been the same. It wasn't. The message arrived shortly after sunrise. Simple, brief, professional, the way experienced operators always communicated. The vessel Aurora was 40 nautical miles north of Flinders Island when they spotted it. At first, the crew assumed it was a cargo ship. Large, dark, moving steadily through moderate seas. Nothing unusual about that, except they couldn't identify it. The captain checked the marine tracking display. Nothing. No AIS signal. No registration. No listed vessel in that position. That happened occasionally. Older vessels sometimes had equipment failures. But something about this felt wrong. The ship wasn't drifting. It wasn't disabled. It maintained a perfect course. Perfect speed. Perfect heading. For over 30 minutes. Eventually, the captain radioed the sighting through. The response was immediate. They wanted photographs, video, direction of travel, anything. The Aurora transmitted everything they could gather, then continued on their way. The report should have ended there. Instead, it became the beginning. By mid-morning, the unidentified vessel had been observed by 3 separate crews. Each report matched. Length approximately 200 meters. Dark hull. No visible markings. No visible crew. No AIS signature. No response to radio contact. And perhaps most strangely, no wake. That was a detail that caught attention ashore. Every vessel produced a wake. Every vessel displaced water. Physics didn't allow exceptions. Yet every image showed the same thing. Waves moved around it. Not because it pushed through the sea. Because it seemed to belong there. Like the ocean had adjusted around its presence. By noon, the matter had moved beyond routine reporting. Maritime authorities began tracking every available source. Commercial shipping, coast services, fishing fleets, satellite passes, anything that might identify the vessel. Nothing worked. The images remained clear. The details remained sharp. The answers never arrived. Somewhere out in Bass Strait, a ship was traveling through Australian waters. No one knew who owned it. No one knew where it came from. And no one knew where it was going. At 12:43 p.m., another report arrived. This one changed everything. Because the vessel had just passed within visual range of a coastal freighter. Close enough for binoculars. Close enough for certainty. The report contained only 7 words. No crew visible. Not a single person aboard. The room monitoring incoming reports fell silent. Because every one of them understood the implication. Ships did not sail themselves. Not out here. Not like that. And yet, the vessel continued south. Steady, silent, unclaimed, as though it had somewhere very important to be. And all of Australia had just noticed it. Commander Sarah Mitchell first saw the vessel at 1:17 p.m. At first glance, she thought it was a database error. That would have been the sensible explanation. The comfortable explanation, the one she wanted. Instead, the photographs loaded, one after another, from different vessels, different angles, different distances, and every image showed the same thing. The ship was real. Sarah sat back in her chair, studying the largest image available, a side profile, clean, sharp, almost too sharp. Magnify that. The analyst beside her nodded. The image expanded across the screen. More detail emerged, but not in the way anyone expected. The hull was wrong. Not damaged. Not incomplete. Wrong. The lines were too clean, too regular, too perfect. Ships didn't look like that. Not after years at sea. Not after storms. Not after salt and corrosion. This vessel looked untouched. As though it had been launched that morning, or built yesterday. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Where are the markings? No one answered, because there weren't any. No registration, no company name, no draft markings, no national identification. Nothing. The vessel was completely anonymous. That alone was enough to trigger concern. Combined with everything else, it became something far stranger. The satellite office called 15 minutes later. We found it. Sarah immediately stood. Confirmed? Affirmative. The analyst transferred the imagery. For a moment, nobody spoke. The ship sat alone against the surface of Bass Strait. Visible, clear, undeniable. And yet, the surrounding data made no sense. Sea conditions matched reports. Cloud cover matched observations. Wave patterns aligned. The vessel didn't. Specifically, its thermal signature. Or rather, the lack of one. Sarah frowned. Run that again. The technician already was. 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. Same result. Every ship generated heat. Engines. Machinery. Humans. Even an abandoned vessel retained thermal variation. This one didn't. It appeared almost identical to the surrounding water temperature. Not cooler, not warmer. Matched perfectly. The room became noticeably quieter. Because nobody had an explanation for that. Not even a bad one. An hour later, the first contact attempts began. Standard maritime procedure. Open broadcasting frequencies. Emergency channels. Commercial channels. Nothing threatening. Nothing aggressive. Just questions. Unidentified vessel in Australian waters. Please identify yourself. No response. Again. Nothing. Again. Silence. The vessel continued its journey south. Unaffected. Uninterested. At 3:02 p.m., Sarah authorized stronger measures. Not military. Not yet. Observation. Tracking. Continuous monitoring. Every available source focused on the vessel. Commercial satellites. Coastal radar. Maritime tracking. Air surveillance. And still, nobody learned anything new. By late afternoon, frustration was beginning to replace curiosity. The ship was there. Everyone could see it. Everyone could photograph it. Yet nobody could understand it. Then something changed. A junior analyst looked up from his workstation. The room didn't notice immediately. Commander? Sarah turned. What is it? The analyst swallowed, then pointed toward the central display. At first, nothing looked different. Then she saw it. A new contact attempt had just been transmitted. Routine. Simple. But this time, the vessel reacted. Very slightly. Very briefly. Its heading shifted. Less than 2 degrees. Then returned to its original course. The movement lasted only seconds. But it was enough. Replay that. The data rolled back. The contact attempt appeared again. The transmission timestamp. The vessel's track. And right there, immediately afterward, the course adjustment. Tiny. Deliberate. Sarah felt the haze rise on the back of her neck. It wasn't random. The timing was too precise. The vessel had changed course immediately after receiving the signal. Not before. Not later. After. The room was suddenly paying very close attention. Another transmission was sent. Different wording. Different station. Everyone watched. Nothing happened. Then, 5 seconds later, the vessel adjusted again. 1 degree. Then returned. Silence filled the operations room. Nobody moved. Nobody talked. Because they all understood what they had just seen. The ship wasn't ignoring them. It was acknowledging them. Not by radio. Not by signal. By motion. Sarah stayed at the display, watching the vessel continue south. Steady, precise, controlled. And for the first time all day, a possibility occurred to her. The ship wasn't lost. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't malfunctioning. It was doing exactly what it intended to do. And now, it knew they were watching. Tom Reeves first heard about the vessel at 4:11 p.m. His immediate reaction was simple. Someone was exaggerating. That happened all the time, especially when unusual events reached the media cycle. A missing registration became a ghost ship. A navigation error became a conspiracy. A mechanical issue became a mystery. Tom had spent 20 years dealing with exactly that kind of thing. So when the call came through, he expected another misunderstanding. Nothing more. Then he saw the footage. The ship moved through the water with impossible smoothness. No visible vibration. No roll despite the sea state. No correction for crosswinds. That bothered him immediately. Ships fought the ocean. Every vessel did. The larger they were, the more obvious it became. This one didn't seem affected at all. Tom replayed the video. Then again. Then a fourth time. The vessel looked less like it was traveling through water. More like it was traveling through an idea of water. The distinction made no sense. But he couldn't stop thinking it. An hour later, he found himself sitting inside a briefing room with Commander Sarah Mitchell. The images cycled across a large display. Photographs, satellite captures, navigation data. Tom folded his arms. So what do we actually know? Sarah glanced at the screen. Very little. That bad? Worse. The room fell quiet. Sarah pointed toward a map of Bass Strait. A projected course line stretched southward across the water. This was our first estimate. The line extended toward open ocean. And this? Tom asked. Our second estimate. A new line appeared. Different direction. Different destination. Tom frowned. The vessel should have stayed on one path. Instead, every prediction failed. Each time analysts modeled the route, the ship changed course slightly. Never dramatically. Just enough to invalidate the prediction. Tom looked up. Seriously? Sarah nodded. We've tested it 7 times. He stared at the screen. You think it's reacting to observation? No. Sarah tapped another display. I think it's reacting to forecasting. The room remained silent. Because that sounded ridiculous. Yet the data supported it. Every time they predicted the route, the vessel altered it. Not immediately. Not randomly. Consistently. Like it disliked certainty. Tom rubbed the bridge of his nose. Tell me nobody has said the word intelligent yet. No one answered. That was answer enough. Outside the briefing room, ships continued crossing Bass Strait. Commercial freighters, fishing operations, passenger traffic. Life went on. But inside, the situation was quietly becoming something nobody had trained for. Sarah switched displays again. This time showing a timeline. One more thing. Tom looked up. The vessel speed data appeared. At first it seemed normal. Then he noticed the problem. The sea conditions were changing. Constantly. The vessel speed wasn't. Not even slightly. Wave height changed. Wind changed. Current changed. The ship maintained identical velocity. Down to fractions. Tom leaned forward. That's impossible. We agree. A pause. Fuel? He asked. No emissions. Engine noise. Nothing. Thermal profile. Sarah looked amused for the first time all day. It matches ocean temperature. Tom almost laughed. Almost. Because no one else was. The vessel continued moving across the map. Steady. Predictable. Except for the parts that weren't. Sarah folded her arms. At this point, we have two options. Tom already knew where this was going. Observe or board. There it was. The word nobody wanted to say. Board. Physical contact. Direct inspection. Human presence. Tom looked back toward the screen. At the dark vessel moving through Australian waters. No markings. No crew. No answers. Who's closest? He asked. Sarah nodded slightly. We've already checked. That wasn't encouraging. The next image appeared. A patrol vessel. Fast, modern, close enough to intercept before morning. Tom stared at it, then at the unknown ship, then back again. The gap between them suddenly felt very small. What happens if we board it? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. Because that was the real problem. No one knew what they would find. Hours earlier, they had been tracking an unidentified vessel. Now, they were discussing whether to step aboard it. Tom looked at the display one last time. Something caught his attention. The ship had altered course again. Tiny adjustment, almost imperceptible. But enough. The vessel was now heading toward a stretch of water with no ports, no infrastructure, no shipping lanes, no reason to be there. Tom frowned. What's out there? Sarah checked the map, then slowly looked up. Nothing. A long silence followed, because that answer should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like the worst answer of all. The vessel continued toward empty ocean, steady, silent, unexplained. And by midnight, the decision had been made. At first light, a boarding team would intercept it. Tom Reeves would lead it. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the ship continued south. And for reasons nobody understood, its speed increased. Tom didn't sleep. Not really. A few hours in a narrow bunk, eyes closed, mind active. Every time he drifted close, he saw the vessel, the videos, the impossible motion, the perfect course changes. And underneath all of it, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. The ship wasn't hiding. That was the part that bothered him most. If someone wanted to avoid attention, they had 1,000 ways to do it. Turn off lights, avoid shipping routes, change heading, disappear into weather. This vessel had done none of that. It had moved straight through one of Australia's busiest waterways, in full view of everyone, almost as if it expected to be seen. At 5:12 a.m., the patrol vessel Resolute left port. The crew was small, experienced, professional. Nobody wasted time with speculation. Not openly. But the questions lingered anyway. Tom stood on the rear deck as dawn crept across the horizon. The sea was rougher than expected, long rolling swells moving through Bass Strait from the southwest. Normally that would have slowed any intercept. Today, nobody knew what normal meant. Commander Sarah Mitchell remained ashore, monitoring every available feed, every satellite pass, every transmission. By now the vessel had become national news. The public knew very little, only that an unidentified ship had appeared. Authorities were investigating. The truth was far stranger. Authorities weren't investigating anymore. They were trying to keep up. At 6:43 a.m., another update arrived. Sarah stayed at the screen for several seconds, then immediately contacted the Resolute. Tom answered. You've got something. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded even though he couldn't see it. The vessel changed course again. Tom looked toward the navigation display. Towards what? Nothing. A pause. The same answer. The same answer. But this time there was more. Sarah enlarged the satellite map. The new heading projected southwest, toward open water, far from shipping lanes, far from infrastructure. But not randomly. The route formed a line, a very specific line. And for the first time, a pattern emerged. Tom listened carefully as Sarah explained. Every major course adjustment during the previous 12 hours could be connected. Not by destination, by geometry. The vessel wasn't traveling to locations. It was drawing something. Across Bass Strait. The room aboard the Resolute fell silent, because even saying it out loud sounded absurd. Ships didn't draw shapes across oceans. Yet the plotted course changes showed exactly that. Sarah continued. We didn't notice it until now. Tom studied the transmitted map. His stomach tightened. The lines were precise, clean, deliberate, not random navigation, not corrections, intentional movement, a pattern large enough to span hundreds of kilometers. What shape? He asked quietly. Another pause. We don't know. The answer wasn't comforting, because incomplete patterns could become anything. Hours later, the Resolute finally sighted the vessel. Tom stepped onto the observation platform with binoculars, and immediately understood why every witness sounded unsettled. Videos hadn't captured it. Photographs hadn't captured it. Presence never translated properly. The ship was enormous, dark against the morning sea, silent except for the surrounding wind and waves. No smoke, no exhaust, no visible propulsion. Nothing moved aboard. No crew, no machinery, no activity. The vessel appeared completely lifeless. And somehow, that made it worse. Tom lowered the binoculars. Range, 8 nautical miles. Closing steadily. A few crew members exchanged glances. Nobody said what they were thinking, because everyone was thinking it. The same question. If no one was aboard, why was it moving? The Resolute continued closing distance. 6 miles. 5, 4. The closer they came, the stranger it became. The hull looked different through every magnification level. Some angles suggested a cargo vessel. Others didn't. Straight lines shifted subtly. Contaves seemed inconsistent. Almost like the ship wasn't built to be observed up close. As though its appearance existed only as an approximation. Tom hated that thought. It sounded irrational. Unfortunately, it also matched the evidence. At 3 nautical miles, the electronic systems aboard the Resolute began behaving strangely. Nothing dramatic. Compass drift, minor timing errors, signal lag. Annoying, but not dangerous. Yet, Tom stood near the operation console, watching technicians work through diagnostics. Anything serious? One shook her head. No. A pause. Just weird. That answer appeared repeatedly over the next hour. Nothing serious. Just weird. And every anomaly began the closer they moved toward the ship. At 2 nautical miles, the vessel altered course again. Not away. Toward them. Only slightly. Half a degree. Maybe less. But enough for everyone to notice. Tom stared at the display. It's acknowledging us. Nobody argued, because by now, that possibility seemed more reasonable than any alternative. The unknown vessel continued turning, very slowly, very deliberately, until its bow pointed almost directly toward the Resolute. Then it stopped. Not its movement, its adjustment, like the correction had achieved exactly what it wanted. Sarah's voice came through the radio moments later. Tom. He answered immediately. Go ahead. Silence, just for a second. Then, the vessel's speed dropped. Tom looked up sharply. The sea stretched toward the distant ship. Calm, gray, endless. How much? Another pause. Exactly enough. His stomach tightened. Enough for what? Sarah looked at the calculations one final time before answering. The numbers were clear, unmistakable. The vessel had adjusted speed perfectly. Not to evade them, not to outrun them, to allow interception. The ship wasn't avoiding the boarding team. It was making boarding easier. And somewhere beyond the waves, the dark vessel continued waiting. Exactly where it wanted to be. The sea state should have made boarding difficult. It didn't. That was the first thing Tom noticed. The closer the Resolute approached, the calmer the water became. Not everywhere. Only around the vessel. Bass Strait remained Bass Strait. Gray, cold, restless. White caps rolled across the horizon. Waves struck the patrol vessel exactly as expected. But around the unknown ship, the sea flattened. Not completely. Just enough. Enough to create a wide pocket of unnaturally calm water. Tom stood near the launch platform, watching carefully. He didn't like it. Nature didn't create neat exceptions. Especially not here. The boarding team assembled beside him. 6 people. All experienced. All professionals. Nobody needed a speech. Nobody needed motivation. They had all seen the footage. All seen the reports. And now, they could see it for themselves. The ship sat motionless against the horizon, waiting. That word kept returning. Waiting. Tom hated that word, because it implied intention. And intentions belong to people, not vessels. The radio crackled. Sarah again. You're cleared to proceed. Tom glanced toward the ship. The distance between them continued shrinking. Copy. A pause. Anything new? Silence for a second. Then, nothing useful. That was an unusual animal. Every piece of data seemed to generate more questions than answers. Just one thing. Tom waited. The vessel speed has now matched your closure rate exactly. He frowned. What? It slows when you slow. A pause. It accelerates when you accelerate. Tom looked toward the ship again. The dark hull seemed completely still, unchanged, unaware. Yet the data said otherwise. The comparison charts didn't lie. Every adjustment made by the Resolute was mirrored. Not perfectly, but deliberately. Like the vessel was maintaining a desired relationship between them. A fixed distance, a controlled approach. Neither too fast, nor too slow. Tom ended the call. He didn't like what that implied either. The launch order came 14 minutes later. The boarding craft entered the water cleanly. The inflatable boat dropped into the sea with practiced efficiency. Tom climbed aboard first. The others followed immediately. Within minutes, they were heading toward the vessel. The ship grew larger with every passing second. The scale became impossible to ignore. Photographs had flattened it, compressed it, made it seem manageable. Reality was different. The vessel towered above them. Dark, silent, immense. No movement anywhere. No crew on deck. No lights in the windows. No visible activity. Nothing. As they drew closer, Tom found himself searching instinctively. A face, a shape, any sign of life. There was none. The deck remained empty. Every observation from the previous day proved correct. The ship was occupied by nobody. Yet somehow, still operating. The inflatable crossed into the calm water surrounding the vessel. The difference was immediate. One moment the sea rolled beneath them. The next, it felt like entering a harbor. The water smoothed noticeably. Not calm enough to seem impossible. just calm enough to feel wrong. One of the boarding team looked down. You seeing this? Everybody was. The patterns in the water seemed unusual, structured, almost organized, as if thousands of tiny currents were working together. Tom dismissed the thought immediately, because it sounded ridiculous. Unfortunately, that was becoming a recurring problem. The ridiculous explanations kept matching reality. The hull now filled their entire field of view. Tom expected corrosion, paint damage, salt accumulation. Years at sea always left evidence. This ship had none. The surface looked perfect, not polished, not maintained. Perfect, like it had never experienced weather. He reached out as they drifted alongside, touched the hull briefly. Cold, not metal cold. Something else. A different kind of temperature. The sensation vanished the moment he pulled his hand away. Tom frowned. He didn't mention it. No point. At least not yet. The boarding ladder hung exactly where they needed it. Waiting. The sight stopped everyone for a second. The ladder was already deployed. Already lowered. Already positioned. Tom stared upward. Nobody had been aboard to do that. Nobody. The sea lapped quietly against the hull. The ladder moved slightly in the wind. The image felt absurd. Like arriving at an empty house, only to find the front door already open. The radio crackled softly. Tom. Sarah's voice sounded distant now. He answered without taking his eyes off the ladder. We are here. What do you see? A long pause. How did you explain something like this? Finally, he settled on the truth. The ship was expecting us. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Not confusion. Because everybody listening had reached the same conclusion already. The ladder remained perfectly still. The empty deck stretched above them. The giant vessel sat quietly against the morning sea. And for the first time since the discovery, Tom felt something new. Not concern, not curiosity, responsibility. Because whatever happened next would happen because humans chose to climb aboard. He looked at his team. Nobody said anything. Nobody suggested turning back. The decision had already been made. Tom grabbed a ladder, looked upward, then began to climb. Above him, the deck waited. Silent, empty, and somehow, far more unsettling than if someone had been standing there. The deck felt wrong. Tom knew that before he reached the top, before he stepped over the rail, before his boots touched the surface. Something about the ship resisted expectation. The deck should have been noisy. Wind, cables, metal movement, machinery. Ships always made noise, even idle ones. This one didn't. The moment Tom stepped aboard, silence surrounded him. Not absolute silence. He could still hear distant waves, still hear the breeze, still hear his own breathing. But the ship itself produced nothing. No creaks, no vibration, no hum, nothing. The rest of the boarding team climbed up behind him, one by one, each arriving with the same expression. Confusion. The deck stretched ahead, long, open, and completely empty. No containers, no equipment, no deck crew, nothing. For something that resembled a cargo vessel, there was remarkably little cargo. Tom slowly turned in place, examining everything. The deck wasn't damaged. In fact, it looked untouched, not maintained, untouched, like it had never been exposed to weather. That should have been impossible. This vessel had crossed hundreds of kilometers of open water, yet there wasn't a single sign of exposure. No rust, no stains, no repairs. One of the team crouched down, ran a gloved hand across the surface. What is this? Tom looked over. The material didn't resemble painted steel. It only resembled what people expected a ship to look like. The distinction bothered him immediately, because the closer they looked, the less certain everything became. A sharp voice broke the silence. "Commander!" Tom turned. One of the team was pointing toward the bow. At first he couldn't see the problem. Then it became obvious. The deck layout was changing. Not dramatically, not visibly moving. Different. Features seemed slightly altered when viewed from different positions. Railings appeared longer, then normal. Sections looked shifted, then unchanged. Tom frowned. "Camera!" Two people immediately raised recording devices. The live feeds appeared normal. Stable, consistent. Yet standing there, the effect remained. The ship felt slightly different every time he looked away. Sarah's voice came through the radio. "Status?" Tom considered the question. "How did you accurately report something like this?" "Boarding successful." A pause. "No crew." Another pause. "We are commencing inspection." He left out the strange part. Not because he wanted to, because he couldn't explain it. The team advanced cautiously toward the superstructure, the enclosed section rising from the center of the vessel. The bridge should have been occupied. It wasn't. Large windows overlooked the sea. Dark, reflective, empty. The main access door stood partially open. That stopped everyone. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't forced. It was simply open, as though someone had expected visitors. Tom felt the same uncomfortable sensation he'd experienced at the ladder. The ship wasn't reacting to them. The ship had planned for them. That idea settled heavily in his chest. He stepped forward, slowly. The doorway led into darkness. Not total darkness. Just enough to conceal detail. One of the team activated a flashlight. The beam swept inside, and immediately revealed another problem. There should have been equipment. Computers, navigation systems, control consoles. There weren't. The room appeared empty. Completely empty. Yet the vessel was moving. That contradiction followed them inside. The bridge looked less like a command center, more like a carefully constructed imitation of one. Familiar shapes, expected layouts, but no actual controls. Tom crossed the threshold. The others followed. His footsteps echoed softly. The space was larger than expected, far larger. That stopped him cold. The dimensions were wrong. The room should not have fit inside the structure they had seen from outside. Not even close. Tom turned slowly, examining walls, distances, ceiling height. Impossible. The same conclusion struck multiple members of the team simultaneously. One finally spoke it aloud. "This room is too big." Nobody laughed, because everybody had already realized it. The bridge was physically larger on the inside than the ship should allow. Tom closed his eyes for half a second, trying to force logic back into the situation. It didn't help. Nothing about this vessel obeyed expectations anymore. The radio crackled again. "Sarah." "Tom." He answered immediately. "Go ahead." Silence. Just for a moment. Then, the satellite feed just changed. Tom felt his stomach tighten. "How?" Another pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice sounded very different. Less professional. More uncertain. "We lost the ship." Tom looked around automatically, though he already knew she meant the satellite. "What do you mean lost it?" "The visual feed still shows it." A pause. But every automated tracking system says nothing is there. Silence filled the bridge. That wasn't possible. You could lose a signal, lose a transponder, lose a thermal profile. You couldn't lose 200 meters of ship. Yet somehow, every system designed to identify vessels now reported open water. Only cameras could still see it. Tom looked slowly around the impossibly large bridge, at the empty walls, the silent rooms, the missing controls, then at the dark corridor extending deeper into the vessel. A corridor that shouldn't have existed. A corridor leading somewhere below. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he became absolutely certain of one thing. The bridge wasn't the destination. It was the entrance. Whatever the vessel really was, they hadn't found it yet. They had only stepped through the front door. Nobody wanted to go down the corridor. That was the truth. Nobody said it. Nobody needed to. The feeling hung in the air between them, heavy, unspoken. The bridge was already impossible. The corridor beyond it felt worse. Tom stood at the entrance for several seconds, studying the darkness. There was light further down, faint, indirect, almost hidden. Not enough to reveal details, just enough to suggest depth. And that depth seemed wrong. The corridor should have ended. Instead, it continued, far beyond what the ship's dimensions allowed. Tom keyed his radio. "Sarah, we are moving deeper." A short pause. "Copy." Her voice sounded relieved, not because of what he said, because they were still communicating. Every minute aboard the vessel seemed to create new opportunities for something impossible to happen. The team moved carefully, flashlights sweeping ahead, boots echoing softly against the floor. The material beneath them looked metallic, but it didn't sound metallic. The footsteps were muted, controlled, as though the floor absorbed excess noise. Nothing aboard the ship behaved quite the way it should. The corridor curved gently to the left, then right, then descended. There were no stays. The floor simply sloped downward, smoothly, perfectly. One of the team stopped suddenly. "Commander." Tom turned immediately. "What?" The man pointed toward the wall. At first, Tom saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed it. Lines, subtle, almost invisible. Thin patterns running through the surface. The same kind of geometry seen in the water, in the course plots, in the strange movements of the vessel. Organized, structured, intentional. A second later, the patterns faded. Gone, as though they had never existed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then they continued. The corridor widened ahead, opening into a chamber. The space beyond stopped everyone immediately. It wasn't a cargo hold. It wasn't engineering. It wasn't any kind of ship compartment they recognized. The room was circular, massive, larger than the bridge, larger than the dimensions of the ship itself. A huge open space occupying impossible volume. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. The walls curved smoothly upward. And at the center, something stood waiting. Tom felt his pulse accelerate. Not because it looked threatening, because it looked familiar. And he had no reason to understand why. The structure rose several meters from the floor. Smooth, dark. Its shape shifted subtly depending on where you stood, never quite settling into a single form. One moment it resembled a pillar. The next, a cluster of interconnected surfaces. The next, something else. The team spread out carefully, maintaining distance. Nobody touched it. Not yet. Tom crouched slightly, examining the floor. The same geometric patterns extended outward from the structure. Not decoration. Connections. Like circuitry. Or roots. The comparison lodged in his mind unexpectedly. Roots. Because the room suddenly felt less like a bridge, less like engineering, less like machinery, and more like the center of something alive. The thought should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, it felt disturbingly reasonable. A soft sound interrupted the silence. Everyone froze. The sound came again. Quiet. Almost below hearing. A low tone. Tom slowly looked up. The structure at the center of the room was glowing. Only slightly. Thin lines of pale light emerging across its surface. One branch, then another, then dozens more. Like veins carrying energy through a body. Nobody had touched it. Nobody had approached. Yet it was activating. Responding. Tom keyed the radio immediately. Sarah. Static. A burst of distortion. Then her voice returned. Weak. Tom. He frowned. The signal quality had deteriorated dramatically. We found something. The light across the structure intensified. Not brighter. More complex. Patterns spreading, joining, separating. The room itself seemed to react. Subtle vibrations moving through the floor. Not mechanical. Rhythmic. A pulse. Another. Then another. One of the team stepped backward instinctively. What is this thing? Nobody answered, because the obvious answer kept becoming less convincing. A ship. The vessel above them no longer felt like a ship. It felt like a shell, a container, a disguise. The realization hit Tom slowly, then all at once. The corridors, the impossible dimensions, the missing controls, the lack of crew. The vessel wasn't missing a crew. The vessel itself was the crew. The room became completely silent. Then, the structure moved. Only slightly. A shift in geometry. A realignment of surfaces. Like something waking from a long sleep. Tom felt the same sensation every member of the team experienced at that moment. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. The strange certainty that they had finally reached the reason the ship existed. And at the center of the chamber, the glowing structure continued unfolding, as if it had been waiting a very long time for someone to arrive. And now, at last, someone had. The structure continued unfolding, slowly, deliberately, not mechanically, organically. That was the thought that entered Tom's mind, and he hated it immediately, because it shouldn't have fit. Nothing about the situation should have allowed that comparison. Yet the movement felt alive. Not biological, not animal, but alive in some other way. The glowing line spread further across its surface, branching, connecting, reconfiguring. Each shift appeared purposeful. Nothing wasted, nothing random. The boarding team remained perfectly still. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever was happening. Nobody wanted to trigger a response they didn't understand. The low pulse continued through the chamber floor. Steady, controlled. Tom glanced at the radio clipped to his vest. The signal was degrading further. Static creeping into every transmission. Sarah, do you copy? Silence. Then a burst of distortion. For a second, a voice emerged. Not Sarah's. Everyone heard it. Every member of the team froze. A fragment of sound. Not words. Something structured. Then it vanished again. The radio returned to static. Nobody spoke. Because nobody wanted to be the first person to admit what they thought they heard. The central structure brightened. Not visually. Conceptually. Tom couldn't explain it any better than that. It wasn't becoming easier to see. It was becoming easier to understand. The geometry seemed simpler now, more familiar, almost as though the complexity was adjusting itself, adapting. For them, one of the operators took a cautious step forward. The structure reacted instantly. The pulse beneath the floor changed frequency. The light shifted. Not dangerous. Responsive. The operator stopped moving. The response stopped too. A realization moved through the room. It was aware of them. Not observing generally. Observing specifically. Tracking individual movement. Individual presence. Tom swallowed slowly. Okay. His voice was lower than normal. That's new. Nobody laughed, because they were all thinking the same thing. The vessel had known they were coming. The ladder, the route changes, the matching speed adjustments. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The ship hadn't been discovered. It had engineered the discovery. The structure shifted again. This time the changes were larger. Sections folding inward, others expanding. The geometry simplified dramatically, until finally it settled into a stable form. The room became silent, because everyone recognized it. Not what it was, what it resembled. A map. Tom stepped closer, slowly. The glowing surface displayed lines, nodes, connections. A network. Huge, complex. And at the center, a single point pulsed brighter than the rest. One of the team whispered, "Is that us?" Nobody answered immediately, because the possibility seemed absurd. Yet the highlighted position corresponded perfectly. Current location, current interaction, current contact. The pulse intensified, then spread outward through the network. One connection, then another, then dozens. The map expanded. Tom felt the room grow colder. Not physically, emotionally, because he was beginning to understand scale. This wasn't a ship. The same realization hit everyone at different moments. The vessel above them wasn't a thing. It was a terminal, a node, one part of something much larger. The glowing network continued expanding, far beyond the limits of the chamber, far beyond Bass Strait, far beyond Australia. The pattern stretched across distances no physical structure could occupy. Yet somehow, the display represented them naturally, as if those distances weren't important, as if separation wasn't relevant. Tom stayed, unable to look away. And then the map changed. One section pulsed, distant, very distant. Another responded, then another. Signals moving through the network, not random, structured. Communication. The room fell silent again, because a disturbing possibility had emerged. The vessel wasn't isolated. It wasn't unique. And somewhere, far beyond anything they could see, other nodes might be responding. The central point brightened suddenly. The highlighted position representing them intensified. Then, something impossible happened. The structure projected light into the air. Not a beam, not a hologram. A shape. Crude, incomplete, but recognizable. A human figure. The room froze. The projection remained unstable, flickering, adjusting. It wasn't perfect. The proportions shifted slightly. The details were missing. But the intent was unmistakable. The structure wasn't showing them something. It was trying to show them themselves. Tom felt his pulse hammering, because that changed everything. The vessel wasn't studying the ocean. It wasn't studying Australia. It wasn't studying geography or shipping. It was studying humanity. The projection flickered again, growing clearer. Learning. And for the first time since stepping aboard, Tom became absolutely certain of something. This wasn't first contact. Not really. Something had already been watching. The vessel had come to meet them. Because somewhere, at some point, a decision had been made, and humanity had finally been invited to notice. Nobody spoke, not for several seconds. The projection remained suspended above the structure, crude, unstable, but unmistakably human. The figure shifted slightly, its proportions adjusting, correcting, learning. Tom couldn't stop staring, because the realization kept resurfacing. This wasn't a display. It was an attempt. The structure wasn't showing humanity. It was trying to recreate humanity. The distinction mattered. A lot. The projection flickered. One arm stretched slightly too long, then corrected. The shoulders shifted. The head resized. Every adjustment brought it closer. Not to perfection, to understanding. The central structure pulsed again. The network beneath the projection lit up, thousands of pods glowing briefly, then fading. Tom glanced down. The illuminated roots moved. Signals, data, information flowing through something unimaginably large. And all of it, connected back to this room. One of the boarding team took a cautious step forward. The projection reacted immediately. Its head turned, not smoothly, not naturally, but deliberately, toward the movement, toward the person. The room froze, because this wasn't passive observation anymore. This was interaction. The projection held its position, studying. The operator slowly raised a hand. The projection hesitated, then did the same. Not perfectly. Close enough. A mirror. Learning. The structure pulsed brighter. Tom's heart was hammering now. Every instinct told him he was witnessing something important. Not dangerous. Important. The projection lowered its arm. Then, for the first time, it did something unexpected. It initiated movement. Without waiting. Without copying. Its hand moved toward its chest. Paused. Then toward the group. The motion repeated. Chest. Group. Chest. Group. Again. 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 Communication. The thought arrived immediately. Not language. Not words. Meaning. The projection was trying to establish meaning. One of the team whispered quietly. It wants something. Tom wasn't sure. No, that wasn't right. The projection repeated the movement. Slower now, emphasizing it. Chest, group, chest, group. Then the network beneath them changed. A second bright point appeared. Not near them. Far away. Extremely far away. Another node. Another location. The projection pointed toward it. Then toward them. Then back again. Silence filled the chamber. Tom looked at the glowing point. The scale was impossible to measure. But the implication felt clear. Connection. Travel. Contact. Something linking distant places. The structure pulsed harder. The projected figure sharpened. More detail appearing. Eyes, hands, facial proportions. Every improvement happening in real time. It wasn't just studying humanity. It was learning directly from their presence. The frightening speed of that process settled over the room. Then, the projection stopped moving. Completely. Its gaze shifted upward. Past them, past the ceiling, past the vessel itself. The chamber darkened slightly. The network expanded. And suddenly, The display changed. The map vanished, replaced by something new. A star field. Gasps escaped from several members of the team. The room around them disappeared beneath points of light. Not a simulation. Not a screen. A representation. Distances, locations, routes. The same glowing connection stretched between stars. The same network. Only now, the scale became clear. Tom felt his stomach tighten. Because the vessel hadn't crossed Bass Strait. Not really. Bass Strait was simply where it appeared. The network wasn't terrestrial. It wasn't planetary. It spanned far beyond Earth. The projection looked toward them again, then toward the stars, then back toward them. The gesture felt almost gentle. An invitation. Not a demand. Not a warning. A choice. The realization settled slowly across the room. The vessel hadn't arrived to conquer. It hadn't arrived to threaten. It hadn't arrived to hide. It had arrived to ask whether humanity was ready to participate. The projection held their gaze, waiting, the same way the vessel had waited in Bass Strait, the same way the ladder had waited, the same way every interaction had been waiting. Patient, deliberate. And suddenly Tom understood something that made his skin prickle. The ship hadn't needed them. Not really. The ship could have left, could have remained hidden, could have ignored humanity entirely. Instead, it had slowed down, changed course, made itself visible. It wanted to be found, because this moment, this decision, was the entire reason it had come. Nobody answered immediately, because nobody expected to be asked. That was the part that caught them off guard. All day they had been trying to understand the vessel, trying to identify it, track it, explain it. The possibility that it wanted something from them that hadn't truly occurred to anyone. Not until now. The projection stood quietly above the structure, waiting, not moving, not pressuring, patient. Tom looked around the chamber, at his team, at the impossible network stretching across the stars. Every instinct told him they were standing at a crossroads. The kind of moment people only understood years later. The kind that divided history into before and after. One of the operators finally broke the silence. What happens if we say no? The question lingered in the air. Nobody knew. The projection turned slightly, not toward the speaker, toward the structure itself. The star field shifted. Thousands of glowing connections faded, leaving only a small section illuminated. A single route. A single path between 2 points. One distant, one local. The projection pointed toward it, then lowered its hand. The route disappeared. Tom frowned. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't warning them. The message felt strangely clear. Choice. The path existed. Whether anyone used it was another matter. The projection looked back toward the group. Waiting again. Tom slowly stepped forward. Not because he felt brave. Not because he felt qualified. Because somebody had to. The projection watched. The network beneath the floor brightened slightly. Responding. Tom stopped several meters away. Close enough to see details within the light. Close enough to realize something disturbing. The projection was still changing. Not dramatically. Subtle adjustments. Tiny corrections. Learning continued every second. The vessel was adapting simply through observation. Tom took a slow breath. Who are you? The room became completely silent. The projection did not answer immediately. The network shifted. Patterns moved. Connections flared briefly. Across the chamber. Across the stars. Across distances beyond imagination. Then, The projection raised one hand and touched its own chest. The same gesture from before. Then, something changed. The image behind it moved. The stars vanished. The chamber darkened. And suddenly, images appeared. Not photographs, not memories. Concepts, fragments. Tom struggled to interpret them. Vast structures, ancient systems, networks spreading between worlds. Huge distances linked together. Then, silence. Darkness. A long period of absence. The impression felt unmistakable. Something had happened, long ago. The system had gone dormant. Waiting. The next image appeared. A small blue world. Earth. Several people inhaled sharply. The projection pointed toward it. Then toward them. Then toward itself. Not explanation. Association. Connection. Tom slowly began understanding. This wasn't a crew. This wasn't a civilization arriving on a ship. This was infrastructure. A system. A network waiting for intelligent species to reach a certain point. The realization sent a chill through him. Because if that interpretation was correct, then humanity wasn't being visited. Humanity was being invited. The projection remained still, allowing them time to process, allowing them time to think. And somehow, that mattered more than any display. It wasn't rushing them. It wasn't overwhelming them. It was treating them like participants, partners, equals. Tom glanced back at his team. Nobody looked frightened anymore, awestruck, confused, overwhelmed, but not afraid, because the intent was becoming obvious. The vessel had shown no hostility, no aggression, no deception, only patience, an incredible amount of patience. The projection looked toward Tom again, and repeated the gesture. Chess, then humanity, then the network. The sequence repeated, slowly. Tom felt understanding settle into place. Not perfect understanding. Enough. You want us to choose. The projection became still. For a moment nothing happened. Then, every illuminated line within the chamber brightened at once. The strongest response they had seen. Tom laughed softly, one short breath of disbelief. Okay. A few members of the team smiled despite themselves, because somehow, for the first time since boarding the vessel, the situation made sense. Not the technology, not the physics, the intent. The ship wasn't offering answers. It was offering participation. The network wasn't a solution. It was an opportunity. And suddenly, that felt very human. The projection lowered its hand. The stars returned. The network expanded outward. Beautiful, impossible, endless. And for a brief moment, Tom thought about every explorer who had crossed an ocean, every pilot who had crossed a continent, every astronaut who had looked down at Earth. Those people had never known exactly what waited beyond the horizon. They went anyway, not because certainty existed, because curiosity did. The projection became brighter. The chamber pulsed softly around them, and Tom realized the vessel had probably been waiting for exactly that. Not intelligence, not technology, curiosity, the one thing humanity had never lacked. The stars shone around them. The network stretched into infinity. And somewhere beyond the limits of human sight, new paths waited. Not because humanity had earned them, because humanity had chosen them. And for the first time, the ship's purpose felt clear. It had come to ask a simple question. Not whether humans were ready, whether they were willing. And standing inside the impossible heart of the vessel looking out across a network connecting worlds. Tom Reeves finally knew the answer. Humanity had always been willing. The chamber remained illuminated long after the projection stopped moving. Nobody rushed to fill the silence, because words suddenly felt inadequate. Tom stood motionless, looking out across impossible distances, across connections linking places humanity had never visited, perhaps never even imagined. The projection watched them carefully, not passively, attentively, like a teacher waiting to see whether the lesson had been understood, or a host waiting to see whether guests would stay. One of the operators finally broke the silence. So what happens now? The projection brightened slightly. The network shifted. A section of stars moved closer. Not physically. Conceptually. The display was simplifying again, adjusting to human understanding. Tom had begun noticing the pattern. Every time they struggled, the vessel adapted. Every time confusion appeared, the presentation changed. The system wasn't showing them everything. It was showing them enough. The projection extended one hand. Several glowing points separated from the larger network. 5, then 10, then dozens. Worlds, or at least places. Some active, some dark, some barely illuminated. The distinction seemed important. One of the brighter points pulsed repeatedly, then faded. Another brightened in response. Communication. The realization arrived immediately. The network wasn't transportation, not primarily. It was connection. An infrastructure for sharing knowledge, sharing discovery, sharing experience. Tom stepped slightly closer. The projection reacted instantly. New patterns appeared. This time they recognized them almost immediately. Mathematics. Not numbers. Relationships. Ratios. Structures. Universal ideas. The foundation beneath every scientific language humanity had ever developed. The projection wasn't teaching. It was demonstrating compatibility, showing common ground. The chamber brightened again, and suddenly, another realization landed. The vessel hadn't arrived because humanity was unique. It had arrived because humanity had become capable of participating. That distinction mattered a lot. No chosen species, no destiny, no prophecy. Just a civilization reaching a threshold and finding something waiting on the other side. The thought felt strangely comforting because it sounded real. The projection moved again. A new image appeared. Humans, not specific people. Concepts, explorers, scientists, builders, patterns of behavior, patterns of curiosity, patterns of growth. The vessel had been studying humanity, not governments, not military forces, not leaders, human behavior itself. Tom felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Of course it had. Every signal, every test, every interaction. The vessel had never asked for credentials. It asked questions, and humans kept answering. The projection looked toward him. Then the image changed again. A ship crossing an ocean. Old, wooden, small compared to the distances involved. The symbolism was obvious. Another image followed. Aircraft crossing continents. Then rockets, satellites, research stations, deep-sea expeditions. Humanity reaching outward, again, and again, and again. The message couldn't have been clearer. Curiosity had always pushed civilization forward. The network simply represented the next ocean, the next horizon, the next impossible thing. The projection slowly lowered its hand. The display faded. The stars remained. For the first time since entering the chamber, the structure itself spoke. Not in words, In sound, a low harmonic tone filled the room. Gentle, complex. The vibration moved through the floor, through the walls, through the air itself. Nobody felt afraid. Quite the opposite. The sound felt familiar. Not because they'd heard it before, because it carried the same feeling as the rest of the encounter. Patience, invitation, possibility. The network pulsed one final time. And then a new point appeared. Close, very close. Closer than any of the others. A location within the local system. Within reach. Or perhaps within future reach. Tom stared at it, then slowly laughed. The vessel wasn't handing humanity the universe. It wasn't offering shortcuts. It wasn't solving their problems. It was offering a direction, a first destination, a place to begin. And suddenly, that made the entire encounter feel even more human. The projection dimmed slightly, not disappearing, waiting, once more, not for an answer this time, for a decision. And somewhere deep inside, Tom suspected the decision had already been made. Not by him, not by the people aboard, by humanity itself. The moment someone climbed the ladder, the moment someone chose to board the unknown instead of running from it, the vessel had probably known the outcome all along. The chamber remained quiet, the stars remained bright, and the first destination continued glowing softly within the network, waiting for the day humanity would come looking for it. The first destination remained visible, a single point of light, suspended within the network, quiet, steady, patient. Nobody asked what it was, not immediately, because everyone understood the more important question. Why show it to us? Tom stood at the edge of the chamber, staring into the impossible display. The point appeared insignificant compared to the enormous structure surrounding it. Yet the vessel kept returning to it, again and again and again. The message was clear. This mattered. The projection shifted slightly. The stars around the highlighted location faded, leaving only a handful visible. Simplifying, reducing complexity, making the picture easier to understand. The vessel was still adapting, still teaching, still adjusting itself to human perception. Tom glanced around the room. Every member of the boarding team had stopped thinking about the ship, because the ship no longer mattered. Not really. The vessel had been the invitation. The chamber was the message. And the network was the reason. The projection raised one hand. The highlighted destination expanded. Not physically, conceptually. Information unfolded around it. Structures, resources, routes, possibilities. Not enough to understand fully. Enough to recognize. This wasn't a treasure. This wasn't a reward. It was a beginning. The distinction mattered. Tom felt it immediately. The vessel wasn't offering humanity a solution. It was offering humanity a challenge. Something reachable. Something worth pursuing. The same way every horizon had once looked reachable. A distant coastline, a mountain range, the moon. The projection swept its hand gently outward. The network responded. New routes appeared. Not active routes, potential routes, future routes, connections waiting to exist. The realization struck Tom unexpectedly. The network wasn't complete. Even now, even after everything they had seen, it was still growing, still expanding, still connecting new places. One of the operators noticed it too. It's unfinished. The projection brightened. An immediate response. Tom smiled slightly. For the first time all day, he felt almost certain he understood something correctly. The vessel wasn't representing a finished civilization. It wasn't showing perfection. It was showing participation. The network existed because countless others had contributed to it. And one day, humanity might contribute too. The thought settled over the room quietly, not as pressure, as responsibility. The projection moved again. Another image formed. Not stars this time. Humans. Small groups at first. Researchers. Explorers. Engineers. People solving problems. Building things. Sharing ideas. The images flowed one into another. Not history. Not biography. Patterns. The recurring behaviors that had pushed civilization forward. Curiosity. Cooperation. Persistence. The projection wasn't showing humanity's achievements. It was showing humanity's methods. The reason achievements happened at all. Tom found himself nodding slowly. Because suddenly, the vessel's decision made sense. It hadn't appeared over Sydney. It hadn't landed before governments. It hadn't contacted world leaders. It had waited for ordinary people willing to investigate something strange. People willing to climb the ladder. That was a test. Not intelligence. Curiosity. The chamber darkened slightly. The images faded. The network remained. Quiet once more. The highlighted destination continued glowing softly. Tom stepped closer to the projection. Not because he expected an answer. Because he wanted to say something. Anything. You really thought we'd come aboard. The projection didn't respond immediately. Then, the network pulsed once. A single wave of light moving outward from their position. The response felt almost like amusement. Or perhaps certainty. Tom laughed quietly. Of course it had. Every part of the encounter had assumed they would investigate. The strange course changes, the visibility, the ladder, the open door. The vessel had been built around a single expectation. Human curiosity. And it had been right. The projection slowly lowered its hand. The chamber brightened slightly. The stars surrounding the first destination became clearer, sharper, as if the vessel was giving them one final opportunity to observe it, to remember it. The point of light remained steady. No coordinates, no instructions, just possibility. Tom stared at it for a long moment, then finally understood something that made him smile. The vessel wasn't telling humanity where to go. It was asking where humanity wanted to go next. And somewhere beyond the network, beyond the stars, beyond everything they currently knew, the future was quietly waiting for an answer. Nobody wanted to leave. That realization surprised Tom. Hours earlier, the mission had been simple. Identify the vessel, board it, determine whether it posed a threat. Now, standing inside a chamber that should not exist, looking out across a network that connected impossible distances, leaving felt strangely difficult. Not because they were trapped. The opposite. The vessel had never prevented them from doing anything. It hadn't locked doors, blocked exits, restricted movement. Every choice had remained theirs, just as it was now. The projection remained quietly illuminated, waiting, observing. For the first time since boarding, nobody felt rushed. The urgency that had defined the operation was gone. Not because the situation had become less important. Because it had become bigger. Far bigger. Sarah's voice suddenly broke through the radio, clearer than before, stronger. Tom. Everyone turned immediately. The signal quality had improved dramatically. Tom grabbed the radio. Sarah, you're coming through. A pause, then relief. Good. Static crackled briefly. We've regained most external systems. Tom looked up. What changed? Nobody answered immediately. because they all suspected the same thing. The vessel had changed. Or perhaps it had stopped interfering. Sarah continued. The ship is fully visible again. A short pause. And you're not going to believe this. Tom smiled despite himself. Try me. Another pause. The vessel has stopped moving. Silence filled the chamber. Tom glanced toward the projection. Of course it had. The mission was complete. Not theirs. It's... The projection slowly raised one hand. The stars faded. The network dimmed. Not disappearing. Closing. Like a conversation reaching its natural end. One by one, the illuminated pathways faded into darkness. The first destination remained lost, holding for several seconds longer. Then it too dimmed. Not gone. Just hidden. Waiting. The room felt different immediately. Smaller. Quieter. The infinite possibilities had not vanished. They had simply moved beyond sight. Tom felt an unexpected sadness. Not loss. Awareness. The awareness that he had just glimpsed something larger than himself, larger than his country, larger than humanity. And now it was retreating from view. The projection looked toward the team. For one final moment, its shape stabilized completely. No flickering, no adjustments, no corrections. A human form. Not perfect, but close, very close. Close enough. Then it performed a gesture they all understood instantly. A slow nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Simple acknowledgement. Recognition. The gesture struck Tom harder than anything that had happened so far. Because it wasn't alien. It wasn't mysterious. It was familiar. The same gesture humans had used for thousands of years. Understanding, agreement, respect. The projection held the nod for a moment. Then the light began fading. Gradually, the structure beneath it dimming, the chamber darkening. The impossible architecture remained, but the active presence was withdrawing, not leaving, stepping back. The radio crackled again. Tom. Sarah sounded impatient now. You still there? He blinked. Yeah. A pause. We are here. That answer felt meaningful in ways he couldn't explain. Because they were here. Not just physically. As a species. At this point in history. At this threshold. Sarah spoke again. What's your recommendation? The question echoed through the chamber. Tom looked around. At the team. At the dimming structure. At the place where an entire future had briefly opened in front of him. Then he smiled. The answer came easily. Don't tow it. Several people laughed quietly. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded exactly like the sort of recommendation humanity would make after first contact. Tom continued. Don't cut it apart. A pause. Don't hide it. Another pause. Study it. The structure pulsed once, very softly, almost like approval, or perhaps coincidence. At that point, Tom wasn't sure the distinction mattered anymore. The chamber continued growing darker, yet nobody felt afraid, because deep down, they all understood the truth. The vessel hadn't arrived to change humanity. It had arrived to reveal what humanity already was. Curious, and willing to climb aboard. The climb back to the deck felt different. Not because the ship had changed, because they had. Tom emerged from the superstructure first, the cold air of Bass Strait hitting his face immediately. For a moment he simply stood there, looking across the ocean. The world appeared exactly the same. Gray sea, rolling swells, clouds hanging low against the horizon. Nothing looked different. And yet, everything felt different. Somewhere below him, inside the impossible structure hidden within the vessel, humanity had just been handed something extraordinary. Not technology, not answers, perspective. The rest of the team emerged behind him. None of them spoke immediately. Nobody seemed eager to break the silence, because they all knew the moment they started talking about what had happened, it would become real. The radio crackled again. Sarah, Tom, I need a status report. He laughed softly. The request sounded absurd. How exactly did someone summarize first contact? How did someone condense an impossible network spanning the stars into a situation report? He keyed the microphone. The vessel is not hostile. A pause. Repeat. Tom smiled. The vessel is not hostile. The response took several seconds. Because somewhere onshore, an operations room full of analysts was trying to process that statement. Eventually, Sarah answered. Understood. A beat. Anything else? Tom looked around the ship, at the perfect deck, the silent superstructure, the open ocean beyond. Then at the horizon. Yeah. Another pause. It's not a ship. Silence. Then, a very long exhale from the other end of the radio. That was my second guess. The team laughed. Actual laughter. The first genuine laughter since they boarded. Because somehow, that answer felt incredibly human. A mystery beyond comprehension. And the first response was still a joke. The inflatable boat waited below, bobbing gently against the hull. The ladder remained lowered, exactly as before. Waiting. Tom stared at it for a moment, then realized something. The vessel had anticipated every step. The discovery, the approach, the boarding, the conversation. But one thing remained uncertain. The answer that had belonged entirely to them. The thought settled heavily in his chest. Because for all its impossible capabilities, for all its knowledge, for all its patience, the vessel hadn't chosen for humanity. Humanity had chosen for itself. The team began climbing down, one by one, returning to the world they understood, or thought they understood. Tom descended last, pausing halfway, looking back toward the deck. Nothing moved. No figures, no lights, no signs of activity. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not monitored. Observed. Like a teacher watching students leave after class. Hoping they learn something. The inflatable pushed away from the hull. Slowly, steadily, the vessel remained motionless. For several minutes nobody spoke. They simply watched it, drifting farther away. Then something happened. The dark hull shimmered. Only slightly. The effect lasted less than a second. Tom blinked. So did everyone else. The vessel remained in front of them. Yet somehow, different, the illusion had slipped, just briefly. For a fraction of a second, the cargo ship shape had faded, revealing something underneath. Something larger, something stranger, something no human language contained a word for. Then the image returned. Cargo ship, gray sea, clouds. As though nothing had happened. Nobody mentioned it. Because nobody was certain they had truly seen it. The Resolute grew larger ahead. The distance between them and the vessel increasing steadily. Sarah called again as they approached. Tom. Go ahead. A pause. Then. The government wants answers. Tom laughed. This time everyone joined him. Because that was the most normal thing anyone had said all day. The government is going to be disappointed. The laughter faded. The ocean rolled beneath them. The vessel remained visible against the horizon, quiet, still, patient. Then Sarah spoke again. Her voice quieter this time, almost thoughtful. Do you think it'll leave? Tom looked back one last time, at the impossible ship waiting in Bass Strait, at the first door humanity had ever been invited to walk through. And for reasons he could not explain, he knew the answer. No. A pause. I think it's going to wait. The horizon swallowed the vessel slowly. Not because it moved, because they did. Returning home. Returning to questions. Returning to a world that suddenly felt much larger than it had yesterday. And somewhere out there, beyond the sea, beyond the sky, beyond everything humanity currently understood, a network of possibilities waited. Not for governments, not for orders, not for permission, for explorers, for scientists, for the next person willing to climb the ladder. And as Bass Strait stretched behind them, Tom Reeves found himself smiling, because humanity had already made its choice. Long before the ship arrived, long before the signal, long before the first invitation, humans had always moved toward the unknown. And now, for the first time, the unknown had moved toward them. 3 weeks later, the ship was still there. That fact alone had become international news. Governments had questions. Scientists had questions. The public had thousands of questions. The vessel answered none of them directly. It simply remained, floating quietly in Bass Strait, exactly where it had chosen to stop. No longer moving, no longer drawing patterns across the sea. Waiting. It had become the most studied object in human history. Research vessels arrived daily. Aircraft circled overhead. Satellites watched continuously. Everything was recorded. Everything was analyzed. And somehow, the mystery only deepened. The vessel never reacted to aggression, never reacted to authority, never reacted to demands. It only reacted to curiosity. Scientists who approached with ideas received responses. Researchers conducting experiments saw results. Explorers asking questions discovered new patterns. The distinction became impossible to ignore. The vessel wasn't interested in power. It was interested in participation. The world struggled with that idea, because humanity had never encountered anything quite like it. There was no invasion, no ultimatum, no warning, just a doorway, and a question. Months passed. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The destination. The point shown inside the network. Astronomers had spent countless hours trying to identify it. At first, nothing matched. Then one team found a correlation. A single location. Close in cosmic terms. Far in human ones. Not a homeworld. Not a civilization. A waypoint. The first step. The realization spread rapidly through the scientific community. The vessel had not offered humanity a destination. It had offered humanity a direction. The difference mattered, because directions implied journeys, and journeys implied choice. Tom followed most developments from a distance. Interviews, reports, briefings. He attended some, ignored others. The world increasingly wanted him to explain what happened aboard the vessel. That was always difficult, because there were no perfect words. How did you describe standing inside something larger than a ship? Larger than a nation? Larger than a planet? How did you explain the feeling of being welcomed rather than examined? Most people expected grand answers. They wanted revelations, secrets, technology. Tom's answer never changed. It asked us what we wanted to become. People were often disappointed. Scientists usually weren't. One evening, nearly a year after the first sighting, Tom stood aboard an observation platform overlooking Bass Strait. The ship remained visible in the distance, dark against the setting sun, exactly where it had always been. A young researcher joined him at the railing. For several minutes neither spoke. Then the researcher finally asked a question, the one everyone wants to know. Tom smiled. Go ahead. The researcher looked toward the vessel. Why us? The question lingered in the wind. Tom considered it carefully. Not because he didn't know the answer, because he remembered needing one himself. Finally, he pointed west, toward the horizon. What do you see? The researcher looked confused. The ocean. Tom nodded. A few hundred years ago, someone saw that same horizon. A pause. And crossed it. The researcher remained silent, listening. Tom continued. Then somebody crossed deserts. Another pause. Then oceans. Then continents. Then space. The vessel sat quietly in the fading light, waiting, as always. Tom folded his arms. The ship didn't arrive because humans were special. A longer pause. It arrived because humans never stopped looking beyond the horizon. The researcher stayed at the vessel, understanding slowly replacing confusion. Tom smiled. Any species can become intelligent. The wind rolled across Bass Strait. Soft, cold, familiar. But not every species climbs a ladder. Silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. The kind people shared when they both knew something important. Far offshore, the vessel remained motionless. Patient. The first node, the first invitation, the first door. Not Earth's greatest discovery. Earth's first introduction. The sun continued sinking below the horizon. The ocean turned gold, then orange, then deep blue. Stars began appearing overhead, one by one. Tom looked upward. For a brief moment he imagined the network again. The pathways, the destinations, the possibilities. Waiting beyond sight, waiting beyond certainty, waiting beyond fear. The same way every unexplored horizon had once waited. And finally, he understood the vessel's greatest gift. Not technology, not knowledge, not access. Perspective. For the first time in human history, humanity knew with certainty that it was not standing at the end of its story. It was standing at the beginning of a much larger one. The ship remained silent. The stars continued to appear. The future stretched outward in every direction. And somewhere beyond the darkness, new doors were waiting. All humanity had to do was climb the next ladder,